My wife cheated on me, now everyone in town is dying. I barged through my front door and sprinted up the stairs. I made a run for the bedroom door before kicking it open. I know he's in here, God damn it! Where are you hiding him this time? I screamed. My wife Susan was shocked to see me back from work and was sitting in bed reading a book. I don't know what you are talking about, honey. I've been here all morning. I could tell from the red glow on my wife's cheeks and the beads of sweat rolling down her forehead she was doing more than reading a book. I know that scumbag is here. I can still smell his stinking aftershave. I grabbed the blankets and ripped them off the bed. Susan tried her best to cover her naked body. It's 2 in the afternoon. Why are you in bed naked? Susan looked like a rabbit caught in a headlight. She stuttered as her brain tried to make up a plausible answer. I began tearing the room apart when suddenly I heard the sound of laboured breathing coming from the closet. I felt a rage of red mist descend upon me before whipping open the closet doors. As I drove back to work, I couldn't get the image of Mason Bradley and his fat gut on top of my wife. Intrusive thoughts about my wife's infidelities permeated my mind as I drove my truck. At 37, my life wasn't where I expected it to be. My dreams of running my own company were as broken as the beat-up pickup truck I used to drive to work. My truck rumbled up to the gates of the steel mill. The security guard at the gate barely acknowledged my existence as the truck roared past him. As I turned into the car park, I noticed my boss, Big Ed, waiting for me. As I got out of my truck, Big Ed came scurrying over. For a man who ran $1 million company, he always looked as if he was out panhandling for his next meal. His slacks were 2 sizes too big, and he wore the same t-shirt every day. "What are you doing tomorrow, Jack?" I hated how Big Ed spoke to me. He had a habit of spitting after every sentence and would sometimes spit directly at me. I was going to surprise my wife tomorrow and take her somewhere nice. Big Ed hitched his slacks up onto his gut. "Listen here now, Jack. My car has been giving me some trouble and I need you to service her. Couldn't you get someone else to do it?" I could tell he was getting annoyed with my attitude. "If you want your job Monday, you will do what you're told." He had me over a barrel and knew I couldn't afford to lose the only job the town had to offer. "I'll be over first thing in the morning." I arrived at Ed's dilapidated mansion. Ed was outside with his car swooning over her like it was some beautiful young woman. His face lit up as he ran his hands over the bonnet of the truck. "Be gentle with her. She's all I got," said Ed. Ed looked slightly smarter than his usual unkempt manner. "You got a date, Ed?" "When the cats are away, the mice will play," said Ed as he gave me a mischievous wink. Ed pulled a red handkerchief from his back pocket and wiped the sweat from his forehead. "I see one scratch on her, and I will snap your neck." I was weary from a long day babysitting Ed's car. All I wanted to do was throw my feet up and have a nice cold beer. I stepped in my front door and was suddenly hit by a familiar smell. It smelt like Big Ed's nasty cologne, but I was too tired to take much notice. My body ached as I grabbed a beer from the kitchen before collapsing onto my chair. As I sat there, sipping beer and re-evaluating my life's predicaments, I noticed something sticking from the armrest of my couch. I walked over and picked up the red piece of cloth, the same red piece of cloth Big Ed used to wipe the beady sweat from his grubby forehead. I unfolded the cloth and, to my dismay, there was Ed's name embroidered in the hanky. I was heartbroken and furious. I knew what it meant, and all I wanted to do was tear the house down with my bare hands, but I knew better than to let my anger get the best of me. My eyes welled up as I sped down the country road. I turned the radio up full blast to drown out my intrusive thoughts. I was too embroiled in a battle with my conciseness to notice the dark figure walking in the middle of the road. By the time I noticed, it was too late. I slammed on the brakes and covered my eyes before the car came to a halt. To my relief, I couldn't find any signs of someone injured. I convinced myself stress was making me go crazy. As I tried jumping back in my truck, I heard someone approaching from behind. "Having trouble, buddy?" I felt a cold chill up my spine. Something was telling me to run, but my legs had turned to jelly from fear. a dark figure stepped out from the shadows of the looming trees overhead. "I thought I'd hit someone with my truck," I nervously explained. I couldn't make out who I was talking to. All I could see was an outline of a tall, dark figure. "I hear you're having trouble with your wife." "Do I know you?" I nervously asked. Suddenly, the dark figure came into focus, revealing an old man. He took something from his pocket before handing it to me. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was Big Ed's red handkerchief. "How did you—" I began stuttering. "What is it you desire?" asked the old man. Suddenly, a strange feeling swept over me. A feeling of intense euphoria crept up from my toes, flooding my brain. I wished every man who sleeps with my wife would get sick and die a slow, painful death. The words seemed to come out of my mouth as if someone else was saying. Suddenly, everything began to spin, and before I knew it, I was back in my truck. I reluctantly drove into work after spending a night in a dingy motel. All I wanted to do was punch Big Ed in his fat face, but with my marriage on the rocks, I knew I couldn't afford it. When I arrived, I was surprised to see Mason Bradley wasn't at his station. I didn't give it much thought until I saw Big Ed coming from the bathroom, looking like death warmed up. "Hey Ed, you don't look so good." Ed stood there looking pale as a ghost, trying to keep the contents of his stomach from ejecting from his mouth. "I think it was something I ate," he explained as I took a step back from him. "Has this anything to do with Bradley being out?" I asked. "Yeah, he was too sick to make it in today. Must be a bug doing the rounds." Over the next few days, I watched Big Ed get weaker until there was no sign of him. I had gotten word that Mason Bradley had died, and from what I was told, Big Ed wasn't far behind. Since Big Ed wasn't in, we knocked off early. As I drove home, I stopped at the local gas station to pick up some beers. Phil, the owner, was at the counter looking like he was about to pass out. "You all right, Phil? You're looking a bit pale there, buddy." Phil covered his mouth, trying his best not to puke all over the counter. "I'm after picking up this bug that's going around." It couldn't be, I thought to myself, as I suddenly remembered the strange encounter I had the other night. The one I was sure was just a strange dream. "You look after yourself, Phil, and get yourself to a doctor. Will you give my love to that beautiful wife of yours and tell her I'll drop over her magazines once I feel better," said Phil before dashing for the bathroom. As I drove into my driveway, I noticed Mrs. Stevens standing outside her house looking distraught. "What's wrong, Anne?" I asked. "It's Mike. They took him to the hospital." "Who took him?" Mr. Stevens was too distraught to get her words out. "Men in hazmat suits." I felt the familiar feeling of despair rise from the pit of my stomach. "Who else got sick?" "Bob, Tony from across the road. The guy who delivers the milk. They're dropping like flies." Days went by, and news of men getting sick and dying all over town continued to trickle in. Suddenly, I was hit with the realization that the man I met a few weeks ago wasn't a figment of my imagination. I wrestled with the guilt of everyone dying and the heartbreak of my wife's infidelity. I didn't want people dying, and if this was my fault, I needed to fix it. I got in my truck and began driving the same road as before. I was overwhelmed with the thoughts of people dying and the guilt and grief it brought with it. As I drove, I suddenly spotted the old man sitting by the roadside. I slammed on the brakes and jumped from my truck. I ran to the old man before dropping to my knees. "Please, I beg you. Whatever you have done, you need to take it back." The old man gave me a confused look. "But it was what you desired. Why would you want to take it back?" I was upset, but I didn't want people to die. "Please, it's not what I desire," I cried. The old man put his hand on my shoulder. "What is it you truly desire?" "All I want is my wife to love me and only me," I begged. Suddenly, I was overcome with that same feeling of euphoria. My world began to spin before I was suddenly back in my truck, and the old man was nowhere to be seen. As I walked in my front door, Susan was standing there waiting for me. She had a look on her face I had never seen before. She ran and threw her arms around me before kissing me passionately. "I love you so much, Jack. Can you please forgive me?" "Of course I forgive you. I always do." My wife's face lit up, and for the first time, I could feel a genuine sense of love from her, a feeling I always desired. "From now on, you're the only man I want and need," she said as she led me upstairs to the bedroom. That night, we made passionate love as if we were the only two people that existed in the world. After we finished, we spent the rest of the night cuddling and planning for a better future together. The following morning, I woke with a splitting headache. As the days followed, I was stuck to the toilet puking my guts up. As I got weaker, the terrifying realization of the first wish hit me like a ton of bricks. I write this as I'm in the final throes of death as a warning to others. Be careful what you wish for,